Hey, Southern Gothic fans! Join us online now at southerngothicmedia.com. There you can find podcast updates, links to our social media, and subscription access to our new members-only series, Southern Gothic: The Monsters, narrated by me, Brittany Scheck-Snyder.
Just off the coast of North Carolina is one of America's most breathtaking roadways, a 138-mile national scenic byway that connects a vast stretch of beautiful and historic barrier islands known as the Outer Banks. Archaeologists believe these small islands that separated the mainland from the Atlantic Ocean were inhabited for more than 1,000 years prior to the arrival of European explorers, most likely by small branches of native tribes like the Algonquins, Shawanog, and Potoski. These were some of the tribes who initially welcomed the European explorers of the early 16th century, but their hospitality would inevitably cost them their communities, as settler migration and European-born disease brought a sharp decline to their population. The Outer Banks, which is now a major tourist destination, known for its beautiful wide-open beaches, also has the distinction of being home to the first European colony of North America, the infamous Roanoke settlement, established in 1584, as well as the world-famous town of Kitty Hawk, where the Wright brothers made their first successful flights in 1903. But it's on Ocracoke Island, one of the Outer Banks' southernmost spits of land, accessible only by ferry, where the last stand of one of the world's most notorious pirates occurred. A man feared by many who terrorized ships on the high seas with his grim persona and massive displays of force. A pirate known as Blackbeard. A fearsome force that some claim still walks amongst the living 3 centuries later, forever searching Ocracoke Island for either revenge or his head. My name is Brandon Scheck-Snyder, and you are listening to Southern Gothic. The dawn of the 17th century brought about the Golden Age of Piracy, ushered in by Spain's discovery of silver, gold, and other rich resources in the New World. As a result, numerous trade routes became occupied with Spanish galleons, ships filled with precious cargoes, proving irresistible to thieves. And without a strong colonial government or naval defense, theft and piracy flourished. So thousands of men set sail between 1650 and 1730, mostly in the waters of the Caribbean, along the Atlantic coast, and near Western Africa. Yet over time, as colonial governments strengthened and European interests in North America increased, suppressing piracy became a priority. Anti-piracy laws were enacted, and the men themselves were being hunted down and hanged. But before the Golden Age of Piracy could come to an end, one of the most ferocious and infamous of these pirates was able to make one last attempt at riches and glory. Little is known about the early life of the man who would one day be called Blackbeard, but it's believed he was born around 1680, likely in the British seaport of Bristol, the country's second largest city at the time. He was known to be literate and was seemingly a well-educated man that historians have speculated likely came from a respectable, wealthy British family. However, as was a common practice among pirates, his name, Edward Teach, was likely a pseudonym taken on to protect his family's honor back home. Teach first appears in historical records as a British privateer during Queen Anne's War, the North American theater of the much larger War of Spanish Succession, in which France and England competed for control of the continent. Similar in effect to mercenaries, privateers like Edward Teach were individuals that independently engaged in warfare under the legal sponsorship of a government. They were not part of any navy, but they received their government's approval to attack foreign ships and take them as their prize, ransacking them just as a pirate would. This approval was granted in the form of a legal document known as a letter of marque. And as long as the ship that Teach sailed upon had a British letter of marque, they could do anything they pleased. But after the war ended, Teach and many of his fellow men, armed with a violent set of skills, were put out of work. So many looked to piracy to earn, and in 1716, Edward Teach joined the crew of the legendary Captain Benjamin Hornigold, one of the fiercest of pirates operating out of the Caribbean. Hornigold, captain of what was believed to be the most heavily armed ship in the Bahamas, quickly took to his new protege and placed him in command of his own ship. Together, the pair amassed a sizable fortune by capturing and looting merchant vessels, terrorizing the high seas, and building a reputation for ferocity. But this partnership would only last so long when in 1718, Hornigold retired. As early as 1687, Britain had attempted to put an end to piracy through promises of clemency to those who surrendered. But now in 1718, the scourge of piracy was so significant that King George I decided to reissue the proclamation. This time, with an additional incentive to those who were willing to turn on their own and become pirate hunters. This is where Teach and Hornigold would part ways, pushing the Golden Age of Piracy nearer to an end. Benjamin Hornigold claimed he always defended his home country of Britain by only attacking vessels of the Empire's enemies. But in November of 1717, his crew mutinied in supposed defiance of this practice, and the captain was forced to flee, eventually sailing to Jamaica, where he agreed to the king's pardon, spending his remaining years cruising the Bahamas, hunting and capturing his former allies. As a pirate hunter, Hornigold would never capture Teach, instead perishing while shipwrecked on an uncharted reef during a hurricane in 1719. Unaware of the mutiny of Hornigold's crew, Edward Teach was unable to aid his mentor. Instead, he chose to continue terrorizing the high seas with his new warship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. This massive vessel, armed with 40 guns and a crew of over 300, had been converted from the captured French slave ship, La Concorde. Many of these men, who would serve as crew under Teach, were not only originally sailors of this French vessel, but some were even slaves, considered cargo. At the time, pirate crews were often treated much better and far higher paid than their counterparts in a Royal Navy or on a merchant vessel. Hierarchies were often established democratically, with ship captains elected based on their competence and fairness. So given the option upon capture, seamen often chose piracy as a better life. Slaves aboard these captured ships were also sometimes given this option. Most of the 455 Africans aboard La Concorde were led off onto a nearby island, along with much of the ship's original crew. But some remained on board with the pirates. There are several opinions as to whether these men were considered Blackbeard's property or crew, but 5 of them would still be by Teach's side the day he died. Now, armed with one of the most fearsome ships to ever sail the Caribbean, Teach would continue to build his infamous persona as Blackbeard, setting sail for the eastern coast of North America. Edward Teach ominously stood over 6 feet tall, and unlike most men of the era who did not wear beards, this legendary sailor became known for his. The coarse, coal-black facial hairs were left to grow to wildly extravagant lengths, which he often braided into pigtails with ribbons of various colors. It's said that when Blackbeard went into battle, he used this mythical mane to strike fear in the hearts of his foes, weaving fuses into the beard, then setting them ablaze before boarding a captured ship with an aura of thick black smoke encircling his heavily armed form. In addition, Blackbeard donned a sling of more than a half-dozen pistols, strapped to his chest like a bandolier. He also wore numerous daggers dangling from his waist, and a large cutlass stereotypical of the time. Blackbeard's entire image had been constructed to invoke fear. Even the flag that flew above the Queen Anne's Revenge is said to contain the image of a horned skeleton with an hourglass in one hand and a spear in the other, piercing a bleeding heart. Yet in spite of Blackbeard's infamy as one of the most vicious and feared pirates, there is no record that he and his crew ever actually killed during their reign of terror. Instead, these men relied on their dark reputation and their massive arsenal to avoid a fight. The best evidence of this came in May of 1718, when Blackbeard and his armed group of about 5 or 6 ships brazenly appeared outside the entrance to a harbor in Charleston, South Carolina. Armed to the teeth, the ships blockaded the busiest and most important port of the southern colonies. All vessels both inbound and out were stopped and looted. Without firing a single shot, Blackbeard had brought South Carolina to its knees, and for nearly a week, the colony was held hostage until the governor and his colonial council cut a deal. The pirate then freely traveled up the Atlantic coastline to the North Carolina city of Bath, where Teach and about 20 of his men settled in, pledging to give up their plunderous ways and accepting the king's pardon from Governor Charles Eden. But this pardon wasn't quite what it seemed, and unfortunately for Teach, this final act of piracy would lead to his demise. The summer of 1718, Blackbeard and his skeleton crew of men set up a makeshift camp on Ocracoke Island near present-day Springer's Point. There, the group of about 20 would base their new operation of forcibly collecting tolls from merchant ships passing through the Ocracoke Inlet. This 1-mile-long estuary that separates Ocracoke and Portsmouth Island connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pamlico Sound, giving ships access to the ports of the Carolinas and Virginia. Local planters and merchants grew furious. It seemed Blackbeard had secretly made a deal with Governor Eden, compensating him financially for looking the other way. As a result, the people of South Carolina were forced to appeal to the nearby Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, to resolve the issue and end the blockade. For this, Spotswood enlisted the help of British naval lieutenant Robert Maynard, providing him with 2 small British warships named Ranger and Jane, as well as about 50 men, charging Maynard and his crew with the task of bringing down the infamous pirate. They set sail from Williamsburg on November 17th, and within a week, they had tracked down Blackbeard and his men at the southern tip of Ocracoke. His ships anchored at a small inlet, now known as Teach's Hole. The following morning of November 22nd, 1718, they commenced a surprise attack. An attack that quickly went awry when Maynard's ships became stuck on a nearby sandbar. But Blackbeard spotted the vessels, whose crews were feverishly attempting to free themselves, throwing heavy objects overboard, giving Blackbeard's men time to flee. Unfortunately, Maynard's ships caught up with the pirates. The men exchanged words, but it was to no avail. Blackbeard unleashed his pirate ship's massive firepower upon the much smaller Ranger and Jane. But rather than engage in this shootout, of which he was exponentially overpowered, Maynard ordered his men below deck, drawing Blackbeard into a clever ruse, convincing the dreaded pirate that his assault had worked. Blackbeard and his men then boarded Maynard's ship. In seconds, over a dozen men jumped out of hiding to attack. A 6-minute melee ensued, and once the smoke had cleared, Blackbeard lay dead, purportedly shot 5 times, and stabbed no less than 20. The lieutenant then ordered his crew to cut off the pirate's head and suspend it from the bow of the ship for them to take home to Virginia, where Lieutenant Governor Spotswood would have it mounted on a pike at what is now known as Blackbeard's Point in Hampton. But the pirate's body was thrown overboard, and legend claims Blackbeard's headless corpse swam 3 laps around the ship before finally sinking into the depths of Davy Jones's locker. Ever since his demise, claims have been made that Blackbeard's ghost continues to roam the coast of Ocracoke, North Carolina. In the past 3 centuries since his death, many who have visited the cove where Blackbeard once anchored say that Teach's Hole is home to a strange, ghostly light moving beneath the water. Locals have come to refer to the seemingly supernatural occurrence as Teach's Light. And many who have seen it have also said it is accompanied by the full-bodied apparition of Blackbeard himself. But perhaps the most commonly told tale concerning Blackbeard's spirit is the claim that he is drawn to the isolated beaches of this island on stormy nights. Believe that when the wind howls off the sea amidst thunder and rain, his voice can purportedly be heard bellowing across the violent tide, "Where's my head?" But like many of the notorious pirates during this era, legends also surround a supposed treasure that Edward Teach had secretly tucked away before his demise. During his rather short reign of the high seas, Teach and his men are believed to have either ransacked or captured over 30 ships all across the Caribbean. But according to a ledger believed to be his, Teach's worth was valued a mere $12.5 million in today's currency. However, it also said that his real treasure, quote, lay in a location known only to him and the devil. In 1996, divers off the coast of North Carolina uncovered the wreck of Blackbeard's notorious ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. Too large for the shallow waters of the Outer Banks, Teach and his crew ran it aground while entering the Beaufort Inlet on June 10, 1718, just after the infamous blockade of the Charleston harbor. Hundreds of artifacts have been recovered since its discovery, including navigational tools, cannons, and weapons. A treasure trove of information on one of the most iconic and feared ships of the Golden Age of Piracy. But one thing which wasn't found was the treasure itself. It's believed that weeks prior to his death, after abandoning Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard knew his time was running out. And it's for this reason he established his mutually beneficial relationship with Governor Eden. The pair were purportedly so close that Teach's home in Bath was said to have had a tunnel built underneath that connected to Eden's estate. Some treasure hunters claim that it is there where the wealthy pirate once lived his final months extravagantly on Plum Point in Beaufort, North Carolina. But others believe the treasure resides in the Caribbean, stashed away on an isolated island or an undiscovered cave awaiting Blackbeard's return. A return that many believe occurs regularly to this day on the shores of Ocracoke Island. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you've been listening to Southern Gothic.
Southern Gothic is an independently released podcast, written and produced by Brandon and Brianne Schexnayder. For special access to members-only content, including access to the series Southern Gothic, The Monsters, as well as updates and links to our social media, Visit southerngothicmedia.com today.